It is the Border Bowl, Tennessee and Kentucky at Neyland Stadium Saturday night. Who wins and why? It's a Locked On crossover edition, Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Eric Cain, Dawe, Locked On Vols meets Locked On Kentucky here in a Locked On crossover, presented by our friends, in part by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can make every moment more $5 bets and $50 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's over at FanDuel.com here today. $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins over at FanDuel.com. Got a fun show coming up here today. Again, we're going to preview the latest rendition of the Border Bowl, Tennessee and Kentucky. Here with Kentucky, from a Kentucky perspective and a Tennessee perspective, and we're going to get our predictions in segment 3. We're going to talk quarterback, season to date here in segment 1, defense, and if your team wins, how in segment number 2. I'm a little scatterbrained right now. Again, your audience doesn't know who the heck I am. They're like, this guy's an idiot. But we talked off air. Hats off to the Locked On people. I had no clue this little. If you're watching on YouTube, look at this setup. It's gorgeous. This Locked On crossover setup. How about that, man? Like, people doing things to make our job easy, and game number 8 of the season, we're just now finding it.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet here with the Locked On crossover stuff. Yeah, like you said, game 8, and emotionally, I think both of our programs in very interesting spots at this point. Kentucky season at this point kind of lost for the Vols, though. You've still got a little bit of life here, obviously at 6-1, but kind of been up and down emotionally as well with different parts of the season. So a little chaotic, this is kind of what you come to expect from, I think, both of these programs. And the fact that the Wildcats are on the receiving end of sort of the negative conversations as of late is upsetting for my corner, but I can imagine from a Tennessee perspective, it's pretty sweet. But yeah, Eric, this is you've gotten 2/3 of the way into the year, and I think that at this point you have some storylines you can dig into as far as just overarching stuff to do with both of these teams. And I think it starts with me just emotionally is what on earth how do I feel about Mark Stoops because of just how disappointing the Cats have been in games that, frankly, I think they should have either been more competitive in or should have won. So it's just kind of a week 8 of question marks, I guess I should say. I don't really know what to feel heading into this Tennessee game other than confusion and disappointment.
Yeah, and that kind of gets us into where I want to start, kind of season to date. And I don't want to speak for Kentucky. I don't cover that team. I don't watch that team every snap of every game. But
sure,
from an outsider's perspective, you sit here and you get a big win in week 1. All right, Southern Miss, that's what you're supposed to do. You get your brains beat in by South Carolina in week 2, and you're like, okay, Kentucky's awful.
Yep.
Then you turn around, you lose to Georgia by a point. You're like, oh, okay, there's some fight there. You beat Ohio, whatever. You go on the road and beat Ole Miss back when everybody thought Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss was still going to win the national championship. You beat Ole Miss on the road, and you're like, who on earth is this Kentucky team? But since that win, obviously, you know very well, 3 straight losses in conference play. Vanderbilt, which is much improved. Florida, big played you to death. And then, of course, to Auburn after, I believe, a 10-0 lead. I don't want to say this lightly. Again, I don't want to say this because it has this team quit, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Or is another loss going to make this team quit? Kind of where is this team right now?
I don't necessarily know if quit is in the cards just because of how resilient Mark Stoops' teams have been, especially against better competition, I guess, this year and in years past. But it definitely does feel like, you know what, I'll say this. I don't think this team has quit or is going to quit at any point this season. I just think they have a ceiling, a very, very low ceiling against certain competition. And when you look at this Tennessee game and you look at how it's gone over the last several years, you don't come into this one really expecting much of anything. And if they're put out like they were against a team like, say, Florida, if they lose 48-20 or something like that, I don't think that quitting is on the horizon, especially with a game against Louisville at the end of the season. But the team doesn't really have a whole lot of juice to give, I guess I should say. for the remainder of the year. So quitting, I don't know. They just don't really have a whole lot of punch to throw at any point right now. So
kind of painted the season there for Kentucky. Some highs, of course, the road win at Ole Miss. I don't want to say it was a high, almost beating Georgia, but that was a really, really good effort. Tennessee, I mean, the first 3 weeks of the season, I mean, you're just blowing the brakes off everybody, and I mean, looking like scoring 70 points. I understand it was UTC. I understand it was Kent State, but NC State, right? There were people saying NC State was going to be a college football playoff team, right? I mean, Tennessee allows a field goal defensively. Nico's pick six allowed for them to score 10 points, but Tennessee scored 50 on them. And since getting into conference play, there's been some big wins. And, the way Tennessee's coaching staff adapted on the road at Oklahoma with 2 backup offensive tackles, riding Dylan Sampson, that defense to a win, I thought was smart. Arkansas, really kind of highlighted like, okay, this offense, it's not where it needs to be right now.
Right.
Nico, where we thought Nico was going to start, he's not going to start there. He's going to start closer down to what a first-year starting quarterback's going to be. I mean, he makes some unbelievable plays. He makes some silly mistakes, right, for a redshirt freshman. Obviously, he lost that game. That was bad. Then you come home, and you have 2 huge wins over rivals. And, Florida, Billy Neighbors been coached for his job for a while, but it's always, what Kentucky is to Tennessee in that rivalry. Historically, what Tennessee's been to Florida since 1992. It's just a game that Tennessee doesn't win. Found a way to win in overtime. It was ugly, but you did. You beat Alabama, which is huge. And the record looks good, and Tennessee's defense is fantastic, and it's arguably the best in the country. I think Tennessee's defensive line is the best in the country. So there is a lot, if you're a Tennessee fan, that you like. Don't get me wrong. But still, I think it's that notion that, like, man, this offense, this team, specifically the offense, is so close, and it can be so much better. And if it ever does kind of hit that next notch, then the Tennessee team can be really good. And maybe that happens on Saturday. We'll see. But so far, it's right where you want to be in the mix of the college football playoff hunt, and taking care of some of your rivals, and another opportunity this week against Kentucky.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing here, Eric, and maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit, is that Tennessee, at least in my mind, if you haven't watched the Vols that much this season, like if you just haven't really paid attention to them, you think of Tennessee, you think of Josh Heupel, you think of high-octane offense that throws the ball around and points here and there and everywhere. You look at what Tennessee has done in conference play, and like you just said, the offense, not exactly where it wants to be, currently 11th in the SEC in total offense against conference opponents. These past 4 games, you're winning games with your defense. You've got a 25-15 win on the road against Oklahoma, 23-17 against Florida, 24-17 against Bama. Your defense is what's carrying you through these conference games. And I mean, if you look ahead to the rest of the schedule, Eric, you got games against Kentucky, Mississippi State, Georgia, UTEP, Vandy. I mean, the defense should be what wins the day for the back half of the schedule. So it's a defensive-oriented team, at least in my mind, when you look at their numbers.
So, Nico, nobody should be out on the Nico hype train. I understand why everybody will call him overrated right now, because his NIL deal got leaked, a while ago, and there was all this hype, number 1 overall player in the recruiting class per on 3. Mm-hmm. He's made some unbelievable plays. You can see it there. Like, dude's going to be great. But it's you're not just going to start off by being great, man. You got to go through some lumps. Sure. He's going through some lumps, and he's making silly mistakes. But man, in that second half against Alabama, for as bad as he and the offense were in the first half, he made some NFL throws, and you're like, okay, there it is. That's it. He made some NFL throws in that second half to win that football game. And so you hope for Nico, you're kind of coming off some momentum and feeling good about yourself. I think he's better when he gets hit early. I think he's better when he runs a little bit to kind of get him settled into the game. You look at Kentucky, of course, former 5-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff, getting him from Georgia in the offseason, has not gone well, got benched at the half against Auburn. You bring in Gavin Wimsatt, and he wasn't any better. What's the quarterback situation, in your opinion, entering this week for the Wildcats?
Well, what offensive coordinator Bush Hampton said entering the week, he said, we're evaluating it and we're trying to figure out kind of what we want to do. He said that essentially what they needed to do was get back in person with those guys and actually see them run the offense in practice to kind of make a decision. My expectation is that they go back to Brock Vandagriff. Frankly, I thought the decision to go to Gavin Wimsatt, and I told you this before we started recording, I thought it was completely ridiculous. In all due respect to Wimsatt, who is a solid athlete, he's not the quarterback that you're looking for here. And that's not to say that Brock Vandagriff is per se. I think that Kentucky's just, again, low ceiling when it comes to how they perform this year. And they may have some great talents out wide. They may have some great talents in their backfield, but their quarterback and offensive line are going to forever hinder their ability to do a bunch of anything. Whether it's Vandagriff or Wimsatt in this game, doesn't really matter. That's a conversation we can have in a little bit, but Vandagriff, I would expect to be Kentucky's QB1. I think he's got the higher ceiling. Again, it may not be that high, but a former 5-star kid, you've got to, at some point, you'd hope this season that you see that talent that you bargained for when you got him out of the portal. Hopefully, maybe this is the game, but yeah, I expect him to start.
Is there a situation where they could play both?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if Vandagriff comes out in this game, and you've seen it, Eric. You've seen how Kentucky quarterbacks have played against Tennessee over the last several years. Will Levis has had some awful games against the Vols, and maybe he has some turnovers. Vandagriff does, and maybe things get out of hand early, and maybe Wimsatt's the guy that comes in, maybe has some better decision-making, runs the ball a little bit more effectively, I guess, if you can even call it that. But there is a world where if Vandagriff doesn't start off hot, I think you turn to Wimsatt. This staff has proven that they've wanted to do it in worse spots before, or better spots, I should say. So it wouldn't shock me if they did it this weekend.
How will our team win? And what's that going to look like? Will it happen? Offensively, defensively, that's coming up conversation as we continue on with a Locked On crossover edition, Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $5, or new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch, okay, in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com today to join today. Again, to get started, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. The Tennessee-Kentucky line, 16.5 in favor of the Volunteers, 45.5 for the total. That shows you what the Vegas thinks about these two offenses. We'll discuss those lines and more as the show goes on. FanDuel, it's America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, it is where you can make every single moment more.
All right, continuing along here on this crossover edition of Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky, previewing the Wildcats and the Vols matchup this weekend. Eric, we've talked about how these two seasons have kind of played out up until this point, kind of talked about how things could wrap up for both of these programs, but let's focus on this matchup here. And the way that I want to kind of talk about this is kind of talk about how both of these teams could go about winning. Obviously, a little bit more difficult for the Cats to kind of figure out how they could win this one, as you mentioned, with the 16.5 point spread there, according to FanDuel. Let's start, I think, in a place that makes the most sense to me heading into this matchup. If you look at Kentucky's previous game against Auburn, Jarquez Hunter went absolutely ballistic, almost 300 yards rushing.
Yeah.
Do you start anywhere else other than Dylan Sampson in this matchup, Eric?
No, Dylan Sampson's fantastic. He's leading the SEC in rushing attempts because Tennessee's had to ride him so much with the offense struggling. But, of course, he fell behind, fell to number 2, I believe, in the league in rushing during the bye week last week. But I expect him to pick up right where he left off. I honestly think, and you could speak on this more, I mean, there's names. I mean, Kentucky. You look at this Kentucky defense, and J.J. Weaver's been there. I know he's hurt a little bit. Dumont Thomas has been there from Georgia, going over to Kentucky. He's been here forever. De'Aaron Jackson's been there forever. Walker in the middle is an NFL first-round pick. They've got some dudes, but yeah, not healthy. Auburn ran for 326 against them. Jaden Baugh, the freshman for Florida, ran for 5 scores and over 100 yards. They racked up almost 200 yards against them the week before. You absolutely start with the run game and Dylan Sampson. I think the big thing, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Like, you don't want to play that game, but I'm going to play that game here. Tennessee's had guys running wide open behind the secondary each of the past 2 weeks, and Nico's not been able to hit receivers, whether it be an overthrow, whether it be the receivers dropping balls. They're not helping him out. That's been an issue. You hit on 1 or 2 of those, different ball game. Tennessee has fumbled on its first possession of each of the past 2 games against Florida and Alabama. Moving the football down the field, fumbling in the red zone. Don't do that. Who knows what the offense could have been in those games? Don't turn the football over early in the football game. Ride Dylan Sampson, and Tennessee should get off to a really good start. For Kentucky to win this game, it's tell me if I'm wrong. It's got to be kind of like playing keep away. In 2021, Tennessee won a shootout. I'm not expecting that for this game, for these two teams. But Tennessee had the football for like 14 minutes. I don't think it'll be that extreme. 2019 was the same way with Lynn Bowden Jr. at quarterback, the athlete. You almost want to just play ball control. You want to play keep away. You want to hold on to the football and try to wear down that Tennessee defense that's so good. How do you go about that? Because there's no C-Rod back there. There's no Ray Davis. There's no Leary or Levis. You got two weapons at wide receiver, but not really going off. Dane Key's having a good year, but not really going off the way they thought they would.
Yeah, no. First of all, before I answer that question, I just want to realize, I don't know if I made a face looking at it earlier. I just realized Dylan Sampson has 17 rushing touchdowns this season. I had to go actually like pull it up on another page just to make sure.
Yeah.
That's a number. That's incredible.
Dude,
Wow.
he is we joke about it a lot. Like, he's a vulture a lot of the times. He's earned all of them, but like sometimes Tennessee will get it down to like the 5 and they'll give it to him and he'll go in. Or, the last year against Virginia, he scored 4 touchdowns and all 4 were like from within the 10-yard line after Jalen Wright or Jabari Small got him down there. But now he has a nose for the end zone, man. He is about to break with another score. He'll break the single season record for Tennessee this week.
Wow, that is incredible. But anyway, back to Kentucky's lack of offensive weapons. Yes, so they've actually got some issues right now in their backfield as far as health concerns go. Jamarian Wilcox, who is a freshman, is kind of carrying the load right now. Chip Trainum's out. Demi Sumo Karngbe is out. Those were Kentucky's top two options heading into the year. Trainum has hardly seen the field. He's a transfer out of Ohio State, but he hasn't really been able to do much of anything because of injury this year. So Wilcox, who was averaging a pretty healthy number heading into the Auburn game, was kind of the guy that was supposed to be the one to carry the load, and Kentucky wasn't really offensively able to do much of anything. They weren't really able to get much of a push against an Auburn defense that is okay, but not elite. I would have my concerns as far as matchups go against Tennessee's defensive line. And this one, would a freshman running back be able to do anything to help Kentucky sort of sustain offense and possibly lead them to a win? But yeah, Eric, I think that in this game, you kind of have to make it ugly. You have to play keep away. You have to play ball control. Does Kentucky have the ability to do that? No, I don't think that they do, especially given what I've kind of said before, is like they're just so limited offensively. But that's what they're going to have to try and do, is trying to make this ugly, slow things down, hold on to the ball. They did some of that against Ole Miss earlier this year. Can they do it against what I think is a better team? We'll see. It'll be tough. Right now, I would say no. But it is handing the ball off to Jamarian Wilcox. It is suddenly finding out that, hey, your offensive line that is stunk all season long can actually get a little bit of push against a pretty solid SEC defensive front. You're gonna have to have so many things bounce your way in this game, Eric, against a more talented team, that the more I talk about it, the less likely it seems like it's going to happen. And like you said, Kentucky, as far as their weapons on the outside, yeah, Dane Key is one of my favorite Kentucky players ever. He's a really, really solid, well-rounded receiver for the Cats. Yeah, Barrion Brown is pretty good. He's one of the fastest players in the entire country. Kentucky's not getting them the ball consistently, and part of it's play calling. I think this has been the worst year for Kentucky's offensive play calling that I've witnessed while doing this show. It is just pathetic. But they're not finding them ways to get the ball. They're not throwing the ball downfield with their quarterbacks, who were not very good to begin with. The offensive line's not holding up that much to help those quarterbacks, or the horrible play calling. So you've kind of shot yourselves in the foot in multiple ways here, despite having some elite talent at receiver. So it's just kind of bucking trends. I guess that's what I would say, as far as Kentucky finding a way to win this game, making it ugly, bucking trends on offense, finding enough to get things done. And then I think on the other side of it, it's trying to find ways to create problems for Nico. It's trying to make him turnover prone in a spot where he's not really been that turnover prone this season, or at least not as of late. You can check me on that. But it's about creating some stops with your defense and creating some havoc and getting lucky. Maybe a defensive score, maybe putting Tennessee in a spot on offense where they have to go out and make some things happen, and Kentucky's defense is able to kind of put some pressure on them. So, yeah, it's all about, I think, a little bit of luck so far in this contest for UK.
That is Kentucky's path to victory. Tennessee, again, start off better offensively because you've not been great in the first half. Get a lead. Lance, I think you'd agree with me. A 10-point lead in this game, a 10-point deficit for Kentucky. It feels like 20.
It's over. Yeah, it would be over.
So, yeah, I think that's key. And the defense continue to do what they're doing. Real quick, some injuries for Tennessee, really, like you'll see Jordan Thomas on the injury report later this week. Like, he's been out all year. Edwin Spillman's going to be out. He's a reserve linebacker. Squirrel White, he should play, but he's got a banged-up shoulder, so that's something to monitor. Dante Thornton will play. He's a little bit limited with a knee, but they'll play, but they're not, like, 100%. Lance Hurd's been dealing with an ankle all year long, but like he'll play. Again, it's that kind of point of the season where you got bumps and bruises, but nothing significant for Tennessee. Well, you mentioned already an injury there. Kind of run down the list real quick for Kentucky. I know Weaver's been dealing with injury. I know Walker's been dealing with injury. What about Kentucky? All
right, brace yourself, because the injury report coming out of the Auburn game was lengthy. And the injury report for this week hasn't come out at the time of this recording. But like I mentioned, Kentucky's starting running back, Demisumo Karngbe, is out. The guy that they brought in to start this season that hasn't been able to play, Chip Trainum, is also out. Kentucky's starting defensive back, Maxwell Hairston, who is their best cover corner on the roster and will be an NFL player, is also out. Janston Dunn, another defensive back, is out. Javon Brown, an inside linebacker, is out. Darian Henry Young, who I believe was a transfer defensive lineman who was supposed to be pretty good, hasn't really played this season. He is also out. Offensive lineman Gerald Mincy is out. Tavion Gadsden. Who is Gerald Mincy?
I don't know who that is.
You don't know? I don't know what. Okay. Josiah Hayes, another solid defensive lineman, is also out. Keyshawn Silver was questionable heading into the Auburn game. I believe that's still going to be his status this week. Walker dealing with some injuries. Derek Jackson also dealing with some injuries. Trevon Ribka dealing with injuries. So essentially half or more of Kentucky's starting defensive front seven.
Are you suiting up for Kentucky this weekend?
Actually they called, believe it or not, they did actually call. I had a couple of different people reach out, but I told them that I've had the flu for what's going on, 11 days now. And even if I was healthy, I was not ready to die for Kentucky football this weekend. So it's a lengthy list, Eric, and that does not aid that does not aid how I feel in this game. But you know what? We're going to talk here in a little bit about what a win would mean for both of these programs, and we're going to give our predictions in just a second. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's also a way of life. And it takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime. And if you're like me, it takes a lot to work through a Kentucky football game where almost none of that excitement is happening. But they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are first in the parking lot, who are the last to leave. We see you. And you know what else gave me a little bit of Kentucky fan fuel this week? It was nothing to do with Kentucky football. It's actually Kentucky basketball's exhibition game, beating Minnesota State, the Division II national champion, 98-67. Kentucky's offense looking really, really really solid. Despite a poor shooting performance, Cats still almost dropped 100. And in their previous exhibition game, they dropped 123. So really excited about what the Cats are bringing on the hardwood this weekend. And also Tennessee as well, playing against Indiana in an exhibition game. The Vols did lose, but it's the perfect type of game you want to see in an exhibition. Quality opponents going at it against each other, game coming down to the wire. Really exciting stuff. I think Tennessee had a game last season against Michigan State that was of similar caliber. Just excellent stuff for the Vols in the preseason. It's been really, really fun to watch both these teams on the hardwood, and it gives us fan fuel. And 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing out your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. It's available on 5hourenergy.com. shipped nationwide. Again, that is all available over at 5hourenergy.com.
All right, Locked On Vols, Locked On Kentucky. Time for some predictions. What we think is going to go down at Neyland Stadium Saturday night. It is dark mode activated game for Tennessee. They will wear their black jerseys again, just like they did against Kentucky back in 2022. For Tennessee, you hope that game follows a similar tune, right? I think it was like 44-6 or whatever. We'll see if it's that lopsided. For Tennessee, I think keys of the game, we kind of just went over a little bit, run the football, get an early lead. I don't think Kentucky can kind of come back from that. Don't give anything. I meant to mention this last segment, like Barryon Brown, great returner. I think he's returned a punt for a touchdown this year. I mean, he's got a couple of returns for touchdowns throughout his career. Really good player. Don't kick it to him. Kick it through the end zone, punt it away from him. It is as simple as that. Don't allow Kentucky to get something extra in this football game. But really, for me, I think Tennessee wins this game. You hope, if you're Tennessee, that this is a game that kind of jumpstarts your offense, and not necessarily because Kentucky's defense is so bad. I think when healthy, it's not horrible. There's really good players up there. I think Tennessee has an advantage going up against that secondary that's a little bit green with some injuries, as you pointed out, Lance. But you hope that Tennessee's offense kind of gets jump-started. You play 4 quarters, and you use this as some momentum kind of sprinting into the last 4 games of the season. So I like Tennessee to win this game. I honestly don't think it's going to be close in the end. I don't think it'll always be that way, but I don't think it'll be close at the end. Give me Tennessee to actually score 30, I don't know, give me Tennessee 38, Kentucky 17 or 14, 38-17. I think Tennessee wins comfortably, but still it's not as high scoring as some Tennessee fans would like.
Yeah, and then for the Kentucky side of things, it's about playing keep away. It's about kind of slowing things down. It's about making this Tennessee offense as uncomfortable as they possibly could be on a home night in Neyland Stadium. It's about trying to get your inexperienced secondary out there making plays. And I think that on offense, you've got to be able to establish the run just a little bit. I don't know if Kentucky's got the ability to do that, but they're certainly going to have to try, especially given their current quarterback situation. Seem to be showing no confidence in either of their players that they have on roster at that spot. You've got to be able to find something with Jamarian Wilcox if he can tie his shoes properly heading into this game. By the way, that's not even something that we were able to talk about. Wilcox, who was averaging 6.5 yards a carry, he was averaging 7 heading into the Auburn game, doesn't really care to tie his shoes. And his shoes came off on runs, and I think like 2 or 3 straight games, and the coaching staff's like, we can't get him to tie his shoes, which just shows you the current state of Kentucky football. But anyway, I digress. Wilcox, who had his shoes taped up, I think, for the Auburn game, so he couldn't take them off even if he tried. He's got to be the guy, I think, for Kentucky on offense in this game. But if it's not him, it's Dane Key pulling something out of the hat and making some explosive play downfield. The Wildcats, I think, are going to struggle in this one to do much of anything on offense. I think there's a very real possibility that they get shut out in this game, especially if they have turnover problems. I think that Tennessee, you said you don't think that they're going to be able to really do a whole lot on offense to impress the fan base, at least to their expectations. 38 points. It's still solid in my mind. I think you're looking at somewhere between a 31-0 to a 38-10 type of game. I will land in the middle there. I'll say 35-3. I really don't think that Kentucky's going to do much on offense in this one. I think they're going to struggle. If you put up 10 points against Auburn, and your method, if you're Tennessee, is a similar approach of run the football, dominate on the lines of scrimmage, and you're just better at that than the Tigers are, you're probably going to win this game by a wider margin, especially considering it's in Neyland. So yeah, 35-3 is where I think I'll land.
Like I struggle with this, man. Like I guess you can say that I'm still not a believer that Tennessee defense is as elite as it is, because I mean it's been so good. Like
sure,
the cornerbacks are so good, the defensive line, enough said. Like the safeties have held up. Like and Kentucky's offense is given no reason to think that they can score 17 points. I just I don't know. Like I remember a couple years ago, 17 points wasn't a whole lot of points, right? Like, you know, case in point, Kentucky's given up 19 points per game defensively. That's not a bad stat in my opinion. That's 10th in the SEC. Like defense is returned.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, I love defense, so that's great. But yeah, I don't know. I said 17 just because I don't think that's a whole lot of points. I think that's a decent day at the office. But again, you're saying you could see a shutout. Goodness gracious. I mean, I'm with you. Like, again, Kentucky's offense is given no reason for belief to this point. So, but it's a rivalry game. You never know what'll happen. It's kind of wacky and stuff. So, out the door real quick. A win for Tennessee would mean, obviously, it's a win you're supposed to have. Okay, you move on to 7-1, 4-1 in SEC play. You're still very firmly entrenched in the college football playoff talks, and it continues to build momentum for a showdown in Athens later in the year against Georgia. If you want to make the college football playoffs, you got to win this football game. I think everybody knows that, so that's kind of what that would mean for Tennessee. Don't want to speak for you, but a win for Kentucky would be, great. You got Duke and Cats on the hardwood here in a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, a win for Kentucky would mean awesome. We are one day closer to Wright State versus Kentucky on Monday, November 4th. And then November 12th, you've got Kentucky versus Duke. I think that's where a lot of Kentucky fans' minds are right now. At least that's where my mind is currently. How are the Cats going to do against the Blue Devils, who just look absolutely insane heading into this college basketball season? So, yeah, it's tipping off the season here in just a few days, and then it's Duke here on the 12th. That's where my mind would be, win or lose.
All right, to get even more information on Kentucky leading up to kickoff, check out Locked On Kentucky. Make that your second listen, Vol fans. And, hey, make Locked On Vols your second listen behind Locked On Kentucky, Kentucky fans, if you want to learn all about Tennessee leading up to kickoff. It is the Border Bowl. It's a game that means a whole lot to a lot of people. It is Tennessee and Kentucky, and it'll be live from Neyland Stadium, 7:45 on the SEC Network. Lance, as always, man, had fun, dude. Appreciate it. Can't wait to do this maybe a couple times in basketball season.
Oh, it'll be really, really fun for basketball season. I guarantee it.
You have that to look forward to. All that and more right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.